Summer can be a bit of a slog. For us, it's often for some reason a rather busy time, and I'm sure we're not alone.
Well, you can beat the summertime sadness and the August angst and enhance your everyday with our excellent sponsor, Via Hemp. This is a company that crafts award-winning premium THC and THC-free gummies.
Each of these gummies is especially designed to cultivate a specific mood. Whether you're looking to get relaxed, get quality sleep, get creative, or just to get focused. If you're 21 or older, you can experience it for yourself and get 15% off your first order with our exclusive code MSheet at viahemp.com. That's VIIAHEMP.com.
I personally enjoyed their grapefruit flow state gummies. This CBG and CBD powerhouse really helped me tap into my productivity. Like, we have had an extremely busy summer, and I feel flow state got me over the finish line a few times when I was editing multiple episodes a day, digging through documents, and knocking out a bunch of interviews.
Via Hemp does not require a medical card, and it ships legally to all 50 states. It's also affordable, and even more so for Murder Sheet listeners who get a special deal.
If you're 21 and older, head to viahemp.com and use code MSheet to receive 15% off. That's VIIAHEMP.com and use code MSheet at checkout. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Enhance your everyday with Via.
Okay, it's time to commit. 2024 is the year for prioritizing yourself. Begin your new smile journey with Byte, and you could start seeing results in just 2 to 3 weeks. Just order your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95 at Byte.com. Byte Clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces. Plus, they offer financing options, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
This episode is sponsored by AutoTrader. Credit scores, down payments, interest rates. Car buying can be a numbers game, but you don't have to be a math expert to get the keys to your dream car. Just use Kelley Blue Book My Wallet on AutoTrader. Crunch your numbers and get your personalized results so you know exactly how much you'll pay each month for your car. It's like having a magic wand for your wallet. Presto! The car you've been wanting is now within reach. So hit the road and leave your calculator at home. Find your next car on autotrader.com.
Content warning. This episode contains profanity as well as discussion of alcoholism, drug abuse, violence, suicide, and the murder of 2 girls.
Members of Richard Allen's defense team have worked hand in hand with internet cranks in order to sway the public narrative of the case, smear perceived enemies, and raise thousands of dollars through a shambling, badly organized fundraiser that left even insiders confused about where the money was actually going.
That is not just an educated guess on our parts. We know all of that because we've just spent weeks going through thousands upon thousands of Twitter messages proving a direct pipeline between the YouTube cranks and people closely affiliated with the defense team. They show months worth of contact between known internet cranks and actual defense team members. Suffice to say, this group has gotten up to some weird stuff, and we're going to talk about that today.
It's important to talk about because it underscores why diligence is important in a case where one side is desperately attempting to spin events. It's also significant for the wider true crime space. When you have commentators who are not bound by journalistic ethics, you get creators willing to sell out their platforms for money and, perhaps more importantly, access. Access brings about power. It brings about a feeling of ownership in a case. It brings about better content. When a commentator is after access, they know that the second they offer anything other than the gentlest criticism, the door gets slammed. So they're incentivized to spin.
Our thoughts go back to a July 3rd, 2024 tweet from the Prosecutors podcast. In it, Brett and Alice expressed concern about the current state of true crime. Namely, the quote, legal and PR teams are well aware of the power of social media influencers to shape the narrative. And that's only going to make it harder for the average listener to figure out who is giving them their unvarnished opinion and who was on the take, unquote.
One of the comments beneath that tweet was of great interest to us. Somebody replied, quote, "It is a massive concern moving forward as it's not going away anytime soon, and it goes both ways as far as the prosecution and the defense," end quote.
So who said that? The commenter was none other than Illinois attorney Bob Motta, who has a YouTube show called Defense Diaries. Motta seems to at least generally recognize this as a concern.
Perhaps it's just that Motta knows a whole lot about this firsthand, at least according to the messages we've seen.
You see, in the communications we're going to unpack today, Motta, Allen's appellate attorney Cara Wieneke, lawyer for the lawyers Michael Ausbrook, and a group of social media cranks strategize over fundraising, give each other tips on jumping on lives to spread their talking points, discuss alliances with influencers, and they write up messaging strategies discussing how to make their cause of supporting an accused child killer palatable to the masses.
Oh, and Motta and the others called Judge Gull a bitch a lot.
We obtained these direct messages from the Unraveling's Twitter account, and we obtained them legally through the owner of that account.
As we said, we've read through thousands of messages. We cannot possibly share them all. In addition, they're often confusing. There are many different group chats. The main one with all the players is called the Due Process Gang. People are often talking over each other. People are responding to earlier messages. So we will be quoting certain portions, but parts will be edited lightly for clarity. We seek to contextualize these conversations when possible with things like dates and information about wider conversations, but oftentimes the words speak for themselves. And of course, we will only be delving into the messages, the thoughts, the opinions, the legal strategies, the rhetoric that we find particularly newsworthy or notable or important for reaching an understanding of the case and the players within it.
These messages show a rather bizarre pattern over time. At first, we believed we were watching a group of attorneys get swayed by malicious internet cranks. Looking closer, as time went on, we realized that we were in fact viewing a group of attorneys manipulate and rile up troubled internet figures who were looking for community and a sense of purpose.
We'll be doing 2 episodes on these messages for now. There's a lot to cover. We'll discuss how this amounted to essentially a machine that was part public relations clearinghouse and part opposition research shop, and part profane, bizarre, obscure message board. We'll cover why Bob Motta thinks we should be in his zone of pain for criticizing attorney David Hennessy publicly, as opposed to doing what Motta did and privately deriding him as old behind the scenes. We'll get into what really went wrong with the fundraiser for Allen's legal experts, including why this group wanted to hide a YouTuber's involvement in the cash grab. We'll talk about all the hatred, resentment, and suspicion this group has for Judge Gull, Carroll County prosecutor Nick McClelland, and the family of victim Liberty German in this case.
Before we begin, let's go over the cast of characters you'll be hearing directly from in these episodes. Cara Wieneke is an Indiana attorney specializing in appellate and post-conviction representation who has been part of the defense team for Richard Alllen. She practices law with her husband Joel. She represented Alllen, filing a limited appearance in the murder case on November 2nd, 2023, quote, limited for the purpose of requesting transcripts necessary for an original action, end quote. She represented Alllen in 2 original actions, one of which was denied by the Indiana Supreme Court after Judge Gull made some corrections to the record, and one of which led to original defense attorneys Andrew Baldwin and Bradley Rozzi coming back on the case. Judging from her Twitter account, she does not believe we went to the moon, and has seemingly never met a conspiracy theory she didn't love.
Michael Ausbrook is another Indiana attorney who is part of the defense team. On February 7th, 2024, he filed into the case in an appearance, quote, limited to the litigation of the motion for summary denial of the state's verified information for contemptuous conduct, end quote. He represents Baldwin and Rozzi and is an attorney for the attorneys. He has served as an adjunct professor for Indiana University Moore School of Law, although he told us his class on habeas law was slated to not be renewed. We interviewed him on the show about his work on federal habeas cases and to get his thoughts on the Delphi case.
Bob Motta is an Illinois attorney who now primarily works on Defense Diaries, a YouTube show and podcast. He works with his wife, attorney Alllen Motta. They worked on one high-profile homicide case in Nebraska that they lost. Motta enjoys a notable increase in YouTube views when he covers Delphi.
Angela Sadlowski is a North Carolina licensed clinical social worker associate. She has also worked as a social media moderator for a YouTuber who has spread conspiracy theories and rumors in the Delphi case. In our earlier episode called The Delphi Murders, The Unacceptable, we covered some of Sadlowski's actions, including her saying that we should be shot, claiming to have hired a private investigator to stalk prosecutor McClelland, and behaving in abusive and threatening ways online. We'll link to that in our show notes. Sadlowski unsuccessfully sued Carroll County over a law that didn't apply to the circumstances, and also believes there is a widespread conspiracy cover-up in the Delphi case. She was a part of the YouTube group The Unraveling, although she did not own the channel. We regard her as an internet crank because of her abusive tactics and penchant for spreading falsehoods.
Courtney Parsons is a dog food company employee in Texas. Along with Sadlowski, she was a part of The Unraveling, although she did not own the channel. We regard her as an internet crank because of her abusive tactics, including saying that certain people should be killed, and her penchant for spreading falsehoods.
Nicole Miller is a West Virginia medical scribe. She posts about true crime cases on social media, but often seems to spread misinformation. Given what we've seen publicly and in these messages, we think it's safe to label her as an internet crank as well.
David Hennessy is an Indiana defense attorney. He also served as an attorney for the attorneys, along with Michael Ausbrook.
Matthew or Matt Hoffman is an in-office assistant for Allen's defense team, although he is often touted as a private investigator.
Richard Alllen, of course, is a former CVS worker who is accused of murdering Abigail Williams and Liberty German in 2017. He is said to have confessed repeatedly to those crimes. His main defense attorneys are Andrew Baldwin and Bradley Rozzi.
As a note, these messages are all from Twitter or X. Motta was using his Defense Diaries account in the group chat. Presumably his wife Allie has access as well, but his correspondents all referred to him as Bob. Wieneke used her law firm's handle, but frequently talked about Joel and I and was referred to as Cara. Ausbrook messaged everyone under his IU Habeas account. The Unraveling account is the most complicated. Paul Mannion, the channel's owner, Sadlowski, and Parsons all worked on The Unraveling, but Parsons appears in the messages under her own personal account. Mannion told us that Sadlowski almost exclusively utilized The Unraveling's Twitter account for the messages, for participating in these group chats. And the other participants in the chats refer to The Unraveling's account as Angela. For simplicity's sake, we will refer to the messages coming from, say, Ausbrook's account as Ausbrook.
We reach out to those mentioned in these episodes for comment, with the exception of Sadlowski. The last time we attempted to reach out to her for comment, she sent back an empty legal threat and made it clear she did not want us to contact her in the future. For everyone else, we offered them the chance to make written statements clarifying their actions, thoughts, and behaviors, and we would be happy to include those statements, if any, in future episodes.
As some of these more off-the-cuff, perhaps even downright vile, messages come to light, we imagine the argument will be that they're just messages between a group of pals. But it is worth noting that these group chats, most notably the Due Process Gang chats, portray a team functioning as a unit to meet specific work objectives.
With all of that said, let's take a look at the secret messages from the Delphi Defense's Brain Trust.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases. We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is The Delphi Murders, the secret messages of the Delphi Defense's Brain Trust. Part 1, Zone of Pain.
Speaking of the Due Process Gang, on March 26, 2024, Bob Motta wrote, "Collectively, we know more about the case than anyone other than trial counsel," unquote.
And they seemingly put that knowledge to use. Most of that revolved around marketing and public relations. In other words, selling the defense's talking points to the public. Selling the idea of Richard Allen's innocence. Of a widespread conspiracy to railroad him.
This group proposed and launched social media campaigns, coordinated a fundraiser, provided advice to the attorneys on messaging, and conducted opposition or oppo research, which in politics involves digging up dirt on opponents. We'll get to the oppo stuff later. That mostly involves workshopping and egging on smears of people like Judge Gull.
The Due Process Gang was a great place to get updates on upcoming filings. On March 17, 2024, Wieneke gave the gang a heads up about a juicy filing hitting the following day. She said that she asked Baldwin to text her updates from the hearing. Frequently, she shared insights on writing briefs and trial strategy, which we'll get to throughout these episodes.
Frequently, the cranks would make suggestions about questionable tactics to employ in the case, and all of those went unchallenged. In one exchange, Miller recommended that Parsons smuggle a recorder into a Delphi court session. She claimed, quote, "I will transcribe each day and say I was there and have photographic memory," unquote. After Ausbrook posted some pictures announcing a trip to Delphi on April 10, 2024, Parsons even asked him to go to a liquor store for a, quote, psyops mission, unquote.
The attorneys would frequently answer the cranks' legal questions, but the interactions were very much a two-way street. The attorneys often turned to the internet cranks for case-related research help. On March 15, 2024, Ausbrook asked for recommendations on new YouTube lives to review in order to get information on the case. On March 17, 2024, Ausbrook asked about when the internet buzz started around the so-called Westerman leak, which of course involved Andrew Baldwin's close associate Mitch Westerman leaking crime scene photos and other discovery materials to people on the internet. On May 7, 2024, he asked if Libby, one of the victims in the case, had pierced ears.
Over the course of the messages, for some reason, Ausbrook became fixated on YouTuber Anthony Greeno, and he would frequently watch Greeno's lives. Ausbrook would ask for recommendations on what to say and what lives to attend and whatnot. It's interesting to see a law professor get sucked into the online wormhole, doing battle with grifting YouTubers with small audiences. Nobody seemingly thought to ask if any of this was a good use of his time. On April 6, 2024, Ausbrook spoke of going on a live to reveal, quote, "some of the evidence we have that the discovery leak came from elsewhere, and that Nick McClelland committed perjury in his verified contempt thingy. Gotta get some permissions and put the things in order once the permissions are had," unquote. It was unclear whose permission he was asking.
"Yeah, buddy," Motta chimed in at 6:13 p.m. Quote, "I always knew that shit was orchestrated by the state," end quote.
Ausbrook backtracks a bit from there. Quote, "The evidence we have is not conclusive, and I don't know what all was actually admitted as evidence at the contempt hearing, but I put it all together with Brad, saying he never had seen at least one particular picture, and the total picture is pretty interesting," unquote.
The messages also show a decent amount of theorizing. On March 22nd, 2024, in the main group, Motta wrote, quote, "I don't believe for one moment that the girls were killed at the scene where the bodies were found. I told Matt that we must locate at least one of the searchers that claimed they searched that area during the initial search on the 13th. That would blow the entire case against Rick apart," end quote.
And to be clear, in that message, when Motta referenced Matt, that appears to be a reference to Matt Hoffman, who's often described as being a key investigator for the defense team.
Wieneke and Ausbrook would spur the rest of the group on with claims that the case against Alllen was nothing, merely a conspiracy of bad actors. But in one March 18th, 2024 message to the group, Wieneke seemingly gave the game away. She indicated that Baldwin and Rozzi could, quote, "make pursuing Richard Alllen so unpopular, the state has no choice," end quote.
Along with many of you, we have long wondered why Baldwin and Rozzi were pursuing a trial by public opinion and YouTube rather than an acquittal before the actual jury. This gives us some insight on their mindset, perhaps, or at least gives us an insight into the feelings of their most trusted advisors. Now, to a certain extent, the mainstream media will swallow talking points embedded in filings and garble those back out to the public. But we've noticed a wider shift in sentiment on this case, so it is not clear that their strategy of using filings to get information out to the public is working.
Now let's take a look at how this YouTube nonsense becomes official defense business. The Fundraiser would make a good case study. As a reminder, Hennessy claimed to have started the fundraiser in the case so that the team could pay for experts. The idea spread by the defense team was that Judge Gull wouldn't give them funds for the experts they need to prove Richard Alllen innocent.
Now, since then, of course, it's come out that Judge Gull is asserting that Baldwin and Rozzi wanted essentially blank checks for experts, and that she merely wanted them to adhere to a process involving invoices. This is quite a bit more complicated than their narrative of a judge unilaterally denying the defense all funds for experts. But this did not stop the internal scramble to milk thousands of dollars from the public.
On March 25th, 2024, at 8:43 a.m., Wieneke wrote to the main chat, "Guys, we're in Crazy Town officially. Going to need everyone's help this week. Hennessy is going to crowdfund for experts. I'm concerned that this might make it so Rick is no longer indigent." But Hennessy doesn't think so. And I guess at this point, who cares? Smiley face. "Once I get the link, I'll share. But they want money for experts." End quote.
It is also worth noting that Wieneke did not mention that David Hennessy may not have been the person who technically started the fundraiser. That would cause some headaches later. But it would take a few days for that to come out. In a private chat with Sadlowski on March 29, 2024, Motta identified the true creator as Alllen, a YouTuber who started Unsolved Crimes Uncovered. And again, to be perfectly clear, this Alllen is not Alllen Motta, who is Bob Motta's wife.
Quote, "I have no idea who that is, but," Sadlowski writes.
"I didn't either," Motta wrote. "She reached out to me 2 days ago telling me she had convinced Hennessy to come on a live and he wanted me on it," unquote.
The details of exactly how this Alley from YouTube came to help Hennessy create the fundraiser remain somewhat unclear to us, although they prompted much speculation in the Twitter groups. Over the rest of the fundraiser's lifespan, Sadlowski and the others would find themselves consistently thwarted by this Alley. They griped that she had, quote, "zero experience or education in doing in the first place," end quote, and that the revelations that a YouTuber started the fundraiser would harm their cause. Especially a YouTuber that Sadlowski described as a, quote, "certified lunatic," end quote.
Miller wrote to Parsons and Sadlowski, quote, "Rick is the face of the fundraiser. As far as I'm concerned, no one needed to know right now that a YouTuber started the fund. Should have remained thinking Hennessy created it. Knowing a YouTuber started the fund is probably the worst thing to put out, no matter what YouTuber it is," end quote.
Of course, none of these concerns prompted anyone to go public or shut the fundraiser down and start a new, better organized one in order to ensure that donors would be protected. The optics of that would have been far too problematic. On March 31st, 2024, in the chat with Miller and Parsons, Sadlowski called Alley a, quote, "fucking weird blonde psychopath," end quote. She said she tried to flag the issue with Hoffman, but he was too busy with trial preparations.
This was a major problem because the fundraiser, not surprisingly, immediately ran into serious issues. Before we get into that, let's talk about the auspicious beginnings, though.
Upon Wieneke's initial announcement, everyone sprung into action. The machine was revving. Sadlowski immediately proposed a sort of Live Aid-esque function with appearances from Motta, Miller, Parsons, Sadlowski, and of course, quote, "crowd favorite," end quote, Ausbrook. Quote, "Just a thought as to how we could push this most effectively / get in front of it and get a factual and responsible narrative out about it," she wrote.
Meanwhile, the link that Hennessy emailed Motta to the fundraiser did not even work. The fundraiser also had the wrong, quote, "office addy," as Motta said. That was some serious foreshadowing. But in the meantime, there was work to do. Sadlowski wanted to workshop the fundraiser page. She said the fact that the page included Hennessy's law office was good and gave it, quote, "inherent legitimacy." But she thought they should have officially pitched it or discussed it first.
Quote, "I'm telling you, I know they don't have the time to prioritize this, but PR and messaging is more important than ever right now," Sadlowski wrote.
Motta went even further, calling the fundraiser, quote, "sloppy," and arguing it should have been run by the due process gang first.
First of all, the picture of Alllen was all wrong. They needed to find something more innocuous, something that didn't scream alleged child killer. Motta said he asked Allen's wife Kathy for a better pick.
Miller suggested that the picture they used be the one that Allen's attorneys had included in their filing to get Alllen moved out of Westville prison. You might remember that that image showed Alllen in a lilac polo holding a small dog. Very non-threatening.
"People love dogs," Miller wrote.
A few other options got posted. Motta singled out the one he thought had the best lighting. Meanwhile, Sadlowski started looking through her camera roll and began posting several pictures of Alllen and his wife, Kathy.
"I love them and I wanted to share," she said. She posted a picture of Kathy Alllen laughing and playing pool, commenting, "She's so cute," with a crying emoji. She described an image of the Allens kissing their daughter on her wedding day as her, quote, fave, end quote, picture.
Motta said he tried to push Hennessy to write a note on letterhead confirming that he was the official organizer and, quote, do a clip, unquote, even though he was, quote, still under gag, unquote, until the judge's next ruling. Promoting the fundraiser would be important, especially given how scammy the page appeared at first. Wieneke felt they could use that to portray themselves as scrappy underdogs.
Quote, "Do we all agree this is a crappy link?" she asked. "Maybe we can somehow use that to our advantage. Look, y'all, it's a crappy picture of Rick. It doesn't tell you why we're doing this, but it's legit. If you want to give, click through and ignore the hurried nature. Time is ticking," end quote.
Motta wrote back, quote, "Love that, Cara. We can edit the language in the body as well as the picture," unquote.
But Motta also had a word of warning for the rest of the group.
Quote, "We can't scream he's innocent because we don't know all the evidence, and what we do know hasn't been vetted," he wrote.
Now, that hasn't stopped Motta from proclaiming Allen's innocence on court TV.
You know, when I just look at it on its face, only knowing what we know now, I believe that he's innocent.
At this moment, though, Motta wanted them to consider the optics. Motta wrote, quote, "The people who believe he's innocent will already be donating. It's the people that we can get to understand that the Constitution matters, fair trials matter for all involved, and that this is bigger than just one case. There's an epidemic of disparity to our criminal justice system, which has existed since inception. This case is just allowing us to shine a light on it because people are watching. Those are the ones we are after," unquote.
For a time, despite its early hiccups, the fundraiser appeared to be a roaring success. There was talk of collaborations and videos to promote the fundraiser, lives to raise more money, excitement over a Fox 59 article that promoted the fundraiser even more, and talk of having other true crime creators like Grisella share the link to get it to go nuclear. And of course, everyone was working to get the word out. A man named Luke Nicholas even helped Wieneke to put together a brand new webpage. By April 16th, 2024, Miller indicated to the main chat that they had helped to raise a little over $40,000.
But then, everything fell apart. Now, again, it's important to remember in this next section, when we refer to someone named Allie, we are referring to a specific YouTuber who is not Bob Motta's wife, who is also named Allie. This is, again, a completely separate person, also named Allie.
On March 27th, 2024, Wieneke published an ominous tweet about how the team was aware Richard Allen's fundraiser was no longer accepting donations. That morning, she messaged the group that she emailed, quote, Henny, and texted Baldwin and Rozzi to tell him to check his email. For days, the group labored over getting the fundraiser back online. Recriminations were hurled at both crowdfunding website Pay It To, which was hosting the fundraiser, and at payment processing company Stripe. Confusion set in. Had Hennessy even set the fundraiser up in his own name? Or was it in the name of the mysterious Allie? Who really had access to the money? Wieneke even hopped on the phone with Allie at one point to try to figure it out. Parsons emailed her from her work email. No one felt they were getting a straight answer. When Hennessy got a QR code for the verification process, he told Wieneke the wheel would just spin and spin and spin. Over the next few days, Miller and Parsons became suspicious. Did someone steal the money? Who was this Allie person anyway?
Bob Motta came back with a witty rejoinder, quote, "Y'all are not fully understanding the part about the fact that David is old. That's a real thing. Technology has lapped him 3 times over," end quote. Again, that's a reference to David Hennessy. Motta also wrote, quote, "There is nothing off about it. David has very little tolerance for this shit is all," unquote.
On April 1st, 2024, in the main chat, Wieneke wrote, quote, "Henny has now imploded. He sent me a curt email acting like I knew that he wasn't able to get the mobile link and asked for access to his phone camera. This is the first time he has said this to me. So now he's quitting. I guess that means he's just going to let the money go back to everyone? WTF?" End quote.
In the main chat on April 1st, 2024, Parsons asked the group what Stripe needed Hennessy to do. She also asked, quote, "Has anyone here spoken to Henny in the past 24 hours? Proof of life?" Unquote. Bob Motta replied, quote, "I have. He's fine. Irritated, but fine." End quote.
Wieneke proceeded to joke, quote, "Guys, we're going to have the Delphi case solved before we get David back on track." End quote.
Ultimately, Pay-It-To CEO Thomas Zen sent a detailed email to Hennessy explaining that the problem was with Stripe. Hennessy needed to verify his identity. Any payout could not occur until that happened. Hennessy also needed to answer some questions about how he could prove that the money raised would actually go to legal experts.
On April 2nd, 2024, at 2:47 p.m., Wieneke announced in all caps that the fundraiser was back.
The good times did not last. On April 19th, 2024, Sadlowski announced that someone had posted an image of an error message regarding the fund. That same day, Luke Nicholas, the man who helped set up an iteration of the page, said he heard directly from Wieneke, who relayed what she heard from Hennessy. Quote, "The donation account has officially been deemed a restricted, aka not allowed business, by Stripe." Unquote.
We'd just like to say that given that thousands of dollars were on the line, it is bizarre and frankly troubling that there was so much behind-the-scenes chaos without any of these attorneys and other professionals deeming that they might need to be honest with their audiences and the donors about what was going on. Instead, they hid the ball in order to avoid any public criticism.
And again, the attorneys in this due process gang complained about David Hennessy. And in other instances, they even expressed doubts about decisions made by Baldwin and Rozzi. But they also often demonstrated rather intense reactions to any sort of outside criticism directed towards them or any other member of the defense team. For instance, on March 15, 2024, Motta went to the due process gang to voice his thoughts on our criticism of some of Hennessy's filings. To be absolutely clear, in this message when he refers to they, he was referring to Anya and myself. At 12:59 a.m., Motta wrote, quote, "When they come after a legendary attorney who has created a legacy and earned respect, like insolent little school children on their shitty podcast, they have entered my zone of pain." Unquote.
We don't know what a zone of pain is. We fear we may have been in one for the past several months without even realizing it. Now, the attorneys criticizing Hennessy amongst each other, mocking his age, technological ineptitude, etc., that was apparently fine. But we were to be sentenced to Motta's zone of pain for publicly critiquing his work in a high-profile case? This level of hypocrisy makes little sense, unless you view this consortium of attorneys and online figures as a public relations shop. Then it all fits. In PR, branding and reputation are everything.
It appears that our characterization of Hennessy's filings and behavior conflicted with the portrait that this team was trying to paint of him as a legendary attorney whose work was always to be held above question.
The thing is, we can have a level of respect for Hennessy's past accomplishments and still feel that his recent output has been suboptimal at times. There's no conflict there, nor do we believe anyone in this case is above criticism. It's silly to be wishing pain upon people who are simply suggesting that one side could be doing a better job. Instead of shooting the messenger who pointed out the emperor's nudity, maybe take your guy to Men's Warehouse or something. But of course, when bluster and bravado are such an important focus, as opposed to anything of substance, then image is everything, and conflicting reports start to look like an existential threat.
Similar hostile reactions continued as the fundraiser got underway. On April 4th, 2024, in the Due Process Gang chat, there was another discussion about us. That same day, we'd aired some critiques about the fundraiser and Motta's promotion of said fundraiser. Namely, we said that we felt it was crass that he was using a hashtag created to memorialize 2 children to promote the fundraiser of a man charged with murdering them. It seemed like an utterly unnecessary and boundary-crossing move, and it upset the families of the victims. In response to this discussion, Motta posted a GIF of a person saying, "I don't give a fuck." He breezily noted that he told us that he was in quote, Mexico until Monday, end quote, and that he would then respond, quote, in kind. He then posted a picture of deck chairs and a pool. Quote, y'all don't travel enough. It's everything, he said to the other group members.
On social media, Motta has frequently derided those who seem to set a specific standard in true crime and then try to hold him to that. So let's check out Motta's own standards and see if he clears the bar. On November 22nd, 2023, in his Defense Diaries Facebook group, he posted a long screed about how members of the gallery, the Prosecutors podcast Facebook group, were claiming that things were getting toxic in his space. We'll read excerpts from that.
And again, this is Bob Motta speaking in his Facebook group. Quote, we started this group with one basic principle that must be followed at all times, and it's simple. Be kind. Use your words in a productive and thoughtful fashion. I believe an excellent rule of thumb to follow is that if you are typing a comment that you would never say to someone that was standing right in front of you, then delete the comment because it's not appropriate, end quote. And again, those were the words of Bob Motta.
Well, let's see how he did. Because the due process gang favored some pretty extreme language, especially when it came to discussing Judge Francis Gull, who of course is the judge overseeing the Richard Alllen case.
On March 27th, 2024, Bob Motta called Judge Gull, quote, a ratchet bitch, end quote. He had previously been complaining that she almost wrecked his latest, quote, vacay, end quote. He concluded with, quote, fuck Gull, end quote. It is unclear if Bob Motta would be willing to say to Judge Gull to her face that she is a ratchet bitch and fuck her.
Well, maybe if she ruined a fourth vacay for him. Miller and Sadlowski also favored the term bitch, especially with the epithets raggedy and old. We counted 5 instances of them calling her a bitch, although there may have very well been other ones that we missed. To be very clear, this was not a one-time thing where somebody lost their temper. Parsons on March 31st, 2024, got so angry that she told the gang she wanted to reach through her screen and rip Judge Gull's lips off. A strongly worded filing was even compared to Baldwin dragging, quote, that bitch through 13 pages, end quote.
Sadlowski, a licensed clinical social worker associate, had a few unofficial diagnoses for Judge Gull.
At various times in several chats, she said the judge was a narcissist, a, quote, full-blooded egomaniac, end quote, and someone with, quote, cluster B personality disorder to the 1000th, period, end quote. She became particularly fixated on the idea, without evidence as far as we can tell, that Judge Gull is an alcoholic. Quote, the clinician in me wants to know if she's taken up drinking, she told Miller and Motta on November 7th, 2023. Quote, I'm not even kidding, she's unhinged. 2 days later, she gloated that she imagined Hennessy was driving Judge Gull to drink. In the main group, on April 30th, 2024, Sadlowski wrote, quote, she's got to be drunk, I'm telling you. No one is this brazenly self-destructive, end quote. In another chat to Wieneke and Parsons, she wrote, quote, she may be the worst person alive. In every way, I'm almost certain she's an alcoholic. It seems now she's even handing out the press credentials herself. SMFH. Or shaking my fucking head. She's a megalomaniac control freak, end quote. Later that morning, Sadlowski told Wieneke and Parsons that she had to go off and work with a patient in a therapy session. Nonetheless, she still found some time to add yet another message, quote, I hate her OMG, end quote.
Apparently for Wieneke and Ausbrook, and even Bob Motta prior to his raggedy vacay wrecking bitch complaint, none of this language was enough to prompt them to voice concerns over the rhetoric or leave the group. In fact, in many cases, their comparatively milquetoast comments seemed to serve to egg the attacks on. Even on the more polite side of that spectrum, Michael Ausbrook's descriptions of Judge Gull centered around witches. He frequently called her Miss Gulch, spelled with 2 L's. Miss Elmira Gulch is the Kansas counterpart of the Wicked Witch of the West in the 1939 film The Wizard of Oz. She's a nasty lady who wants to kill a young girl's dog. Ausbrook was seemingly so enamored of this joke that he used it on March 15th, 2024, March 17th, 2024, March 31st, 2024, and on May 20th, 2024. On April 3rd, 2024, Ausbrook hinted to the group that something was coming. Quote, likely to cause the dispatch of the Allen County flying monkeys southward, end quote.
Motta joined in with one choice gif of Margaret Hamilton's famous portrayal of the Wicked Witch from The Wizard of Oz, while Sadlowski also even adopted the nickname Miss Gulch. After giving an interview to Fox 59 about the case, Ausbrook told the gang that he, quote, gave Miss Gulch Strickland right between the eyes, end quote. In the article, he characterized Gull's actions as a, quote, constitutional violation in motion, end quote.
On March 18, 2024, Wieneke wrote to the main group about her assessment of the judge, comparing Gull to a poorly trained dog. Quote, this is her way of asserting her authority. My dog humps people. The judge does this, end quote. So again, this is an Indiana attorney comparing a judge ruling against her favored side to a dog humping people in an attempt to assert dominance.
It is so interesting to us that the attacks on Gull often strayed from her actions in the case. Even amongst the attorneys, every decision she made was processed through the lens of her malice, her innate evil. It seems reasonable and possible to critique a public official without resorting to gendered insults, bizarre violent fantasies, unprofessional diagnoses, and repetitive classic film references. One could, just focus on the law. It's a bit more boring, although there's only so many times you can call someone a raggedy bitch without it getting pretty old. On March 17, 2024, Sadlowski asserted that criticisms of her and Parsons ought to be added to the list of things Gull was responsible for. After Sadlowski and Parsons were announced as defense witnesses for the contempt hearing, they claimed to have received widespread harassment. Sadlowski blamed Judge Gull for uploading emails to the record, which is very much required and part of her job, by the way. She said she urged Wieneke and Hoffman to, quote, raise the issue, end quote, and wondered if Judge Gull was a white supremacist. To be clear, Parsons and Sadlowski are both also white. Quote, Gull has already set a precedent where as soon as a witness is named, it's an open season and free pass to totally assassinate their character and credibility before they even step on the stand, Sadlowski told the main group. Quote, she's literally putting cyber hits out on them, end quote.
Judge Gull, of course, was far from the only public official to receive widespread hate and condemnation from the due process gang. Carroll County prosecutor Nicholas McClelland was also a frequent target, although we should note that it was Judge Gull who bore the brunt of the attacks.
In a message sent to Miller and Motta on October 30th, 2023, Sadlowski turned her attention to McClelland. Quote, Nick McClelland needs a beatdown. God, I hate these people, end quote.
Motta responded, quote, have I told you all I love you today, end quote.
Sadlowski shared at least one bizarre sexualized thought about McClelland. On November 7th, 2023, in a message between her, Parsons, and Miller, she fantasized about McClelland snorting cocaine in order to celebrate the removal of Baldwin and Rozzi, or the, quote, defense daddies, as she called them. Quote, you think he's doing blow off Judge Gull's thunder thighs? She asked.
That was not the only strange sexual talk about McClelland. In one joking message to the main group on April 3rd, 2024, Bob Motta referred to McClelland as, quote, Big Dick Nick, end quote.
When it came to Wieneke and Ausbrook, they preferred takedowns around their perceptions of McClelland's intelligence. On March 18th, 2024, to the main group, Wieneke told everyone that the fact that the state dismissed the kidnapping charges against Alllen, quote, confirmed to me that Nick McClelland is an idiot. Only logical explanation. My sister said he probably didn't want the jury to have an option at a compromise verdict. Maybe. But who compromises on two murdered girls? End quote.
On May 17th, 2024, in response to a comment from Miller calling McClelland a, quote, idiot, Michael Ausbrook said he had to, quote, agree that Nicholas McClelland is an idiot, and for so many reasons. But being a prosecutor, he's now used to getting whatever he wants just for the asking. Just the way it goes in most trial courts. Must have forgotten his public defender days. For the moment, I will attribute this all to mere idiocy. Skullduggery may be emerging, though. It is much harder to figure out what Miss Gulch is up to, and why, end quote.
Ausbrook's response is typical of the attorneys in this group. The process was simple and very easy to catch in these messages. Absorb the already inflamed language from the internet figures, mirror it back with an intellectual and slightly less profane gloss, profit. The internet figures were all flattered to have real-life defense team members agreeing with them, and more resolute than ever in their beliefs that they were dealing with evil, wretched public officials who, frankly, deserve harm.
You can see how Ausbrook's response we quoted above worked on Sadlowski. She wrote back to him, quote, "This keeps me up at night. It can't just be personal dislike or revenge. Like at this point, there's no way, right?" End quote.
Now, Miller, Sadlowski, and Parsons are all adults. They are responsible for their own behavior. They are certainly responsible for what they say and what they do. That being said, having looked through all of these thousands of messages, it is hard to see this as anything other than manipulation on the part of these attorneys. We feel that this appears to be 3 educated attorneys essentially manipulating troubled and uninformed people in order to get them to attack their perceived enemies in the case.
We've spoken about the criticisms against Judge Gull and about criticisms about prosecutor Nicholas McClelland, but these adversaries of the defense attorneys were not the only ones targeted.
A May 7th, 2024 article from the Carroll County Comet, written by reporter Amy Graham McCarty, came out about the delay of the trial. It contained quotes from Allен County's chief public defender, William Libredo, who previously served as Allen's defense attorney, along with Robert Scrimmen. They were both appointed by Judge Gull after she removed Baldwin and Rozzi. Libredo has been a major public supporter of Alllen, doing numerous press interviews where he said he believed in Allen's innocence, with the qualifier that he was only on the case a short time and therefore didn't get that into discovery. Anyways, in this article, Libredo included a few very mild criticisms of Rozzi's performance at the May 7th, 2024 pretrial hearing. There, Rozzi told the judge she knew nothing of the case.
Quote, "I didn't really see any animation from the prosecutor or judge. Mr. Rozzi did the vast majority of the talking for the defense. Without knowing what had been happening since I got off the case, it seemed a bit aggressive telling the judge she didn't know anything about the case." End quote.
In the due process gang chat, Sadlowski posted screenshots of the story, adding, "What a prick, LOL." Parsons replied by calling the reporter a, quote, "fucking bitch cunt," end quote. She also indicated that she believed that the reporter was secretly me, Anya Kane, and proceeded to criticize Libredo for thinking he's, quote, Bob Motta.
A bit more time passed before the attorneys weighed in. That night, Michael Ausbrook wrote, quote, "Libredo should really not be flapping his lips. His Gull worship undermines any credibility he might pretend to," end quote.
The following morning, on May 8th, 2024, at 7:39 a.m., Wieneke replied, quote, "Libredo is a beta male. He waits until after a fight is over to come in and talk smack. He should be embarrassed," end quote.
So this is very interesting because within this group, it is not enough to go out and publicly proclaim Allen's factual innocence. A true believer must also worship at the shrine of Baldwin and Rozzi, and the shrine of Hennessy and Wieneke and Ausbrook and Motta for that matter. And this worship is what you need to be truly enlightened. Even mild critiques are akin to blasphemy. That culture, emphasis on the first syllable, seems less than ideal if the intent is to gain accurate and necessary feedback.
Now, it may not be too surprising for this group to declare perceived enemies like Judge Gull and McClelland, and even perceived lukewarm allies like Libredo, as acceptable targets of derision and suspicion. But we were surprised at how much they went after Libby's family. These are, after all, family members who have been grieving the loss of their 14-year-old sister, granddaughter, and daughter since 2017. For Sadlowski, the anger towards Libby's family goes deep. In a chat with Parsons and Miller on January 5th, 2024, at 1:33 p.m., she wrote, quote, "I'm honestly so fucking grossed out with the virtue signaling in Delphi, and borderline resenting the victim families." She labeled anyone posting, quote, "smiling happy photos of the victims before they died," end quote, as, quote, "so fucking irritating," end quote, and opined that it was simply leverage. In a surprising aside, she asked, quote, "Am I an asshole? That's my question, LMAFO," end quote.
I just want to hop in here for a minute and point out I find it especially striking that she is criticizing people for posting pictures of the victims of this murder case, while earlier we saw her basically fangirling over pictures of Richard Alllen, who of course is the man accused of murdering those girls. It is really bizarre to be so triggered by photos of murder victims in happier times.
Sadlowski, of course, reserved much of her ire for Libby's grandmother, Becky. In the same side chat with Miller and Parsons, she claimed that Becky has, quote, flying monkeys, end quote, who have been controlling the case, quote, literally using mafia and gang tactics to influence public perception, end quote. Given the fact that the case has been marked by abusive behavior directed towards this victim's family since the jump, this seems like a flawed premise, just factually. I'll also say that Kevin and I, at times, have been on the opposite side of the family when it came to things that we were calling for. For instance, Libby's family was pretty public about how they did not want the probable cause affidavit in the case released. Kevin and I publicly said that the PCA should be released. We experienced no mafia tactics as a result of taking a different stance than the victim's family. Sadlowski, though, described Libby's family as an all-powerful clan that have been, quote, treated better than the dead fucking victims, end quote. It's frankly unclear what that means, given the girls are in fact dead, but it's safe to say that Sadlowski's conclusion is ultimately that the family consists of, quote, Ellie puppets from day one, end quote.
Of course, the attorneys were also well aware of Sadlowski's feelings about the families. To the main group chat on March 28, 2024, Sadlowski wrote, quote, everything I learned makes me suspect family fuckery more and more. Not necessarily actual murder related, but there's some dark shit there, end quote. Sadlowski was not alone. Miller frequently joined in like a one-crank Greek chorus to validate her claims. And of course, Motta tended to agree with Sadlowski's conclusions.
On November 5th, 2023, Sadlowski told Motta and Miller that Libby's relatives were the, quote, Prince and Queen of Carroll County, end quote, and so were able to ensure the trial took place in Carroll County, which of course was Judge Gull's decision. She wrote, quote, the fucking white glove coddling and enabling and barf, it's really gross. I 100% agree with reasonable accommodations for full victim participation. But that is not what this is, end quote. This social worker, who has frequently touted herself as a victim's advocate, went even further. Quote, families shouldn't be anywhere near the legal proceedings, end quote.
That is a pretty remarkable statement. We wonder what the relief would be. The families in this case are already gagged. We have never seen them call for Richard Alllen to be convicted. We have never seen them do anything egregious around this case. They seem like they're watching this play out, just like everyone else. But seeing these internet cranks froth at the mouth about the family is almost like watching a guilty conscience emerge. As if the mere presence of those who lost children is enough to shame those who would exploit the case. Instead of sitting with that sense of shame, though, the move is always to claim victimhood and further attack the true victims in this case.
In the main group on March 21st, 2024, Motta and Sadlowski were concurring that they didn't believe the crime was committed by someone on methamphetamines.
Motta does come in with a 9:49 p.m. thought that there was a theory that, quote, it was committed by dudes that are cogs in the meth ring machine and being protected, end quote. Then Motta gets into it. Quote, I'm afraid to say debt owed by family, but, end quote. And then he adds, quote, anything is on the table as far as I'm concerned, end quote.
Parsons objects that, quote, killing children violates most biker rules, end quote.
Motta doubles down on his theory, saying he's talking about Vinlanders.
Having witnessed Motta operate up close, we'll be interested to see if he will follow his own philosophy and tell Libby's family the reasons he thinks they can't be taken off the table as suspects or accomplices, given that there is a man currently charged with killing Libby and Abby awaiting trial, who has apparently confessed multiple times. Libby's family members are present at all the hearings, so if he chooses to show his face, there should be an opportunity for him to do this. We'd love to learn his reasoning too. Of course, the most likely outcome of all of this is that in a few years or so, after it's all over, he'll simply slither up to them at CrimeCon or something and simper about how much he admires their advocacy before asking them on his pod.
And of course, he will hope that they don't remember how he suggested that the possibility of them being involved in the death of their loved ones should still be, quote, on the table, end quote. Sometimes the verbal attacks on others led to somewhat violent imaginings. We should say that in person and in writing, we specifically warned Bob Motta about Angela Sadlowski and Courtney Parsons. Those conversations occurred in November of 2023. We told Motta that they had made violent threats towards us and others, and that they lacked credibility in this space. Motta replied by very much obfuscating and claiming to have not seen such behavior, although he did end up declining to attend their Groundswell event after we reached out. We will get into Groundswell a bit more in the next episode, but essentially it was a low-quality, low-turnout rally for Richard Alllen. In our experience, Bob Motta seems to bristle at anyone criticizing his choice of associates. But frankly, we saw us reaching out as giving a fair warning to a person we then believed to be well-intentioned and who must just be ignorant of the true nature of his new friends. Looking through this due process gang chat, we see that we were incorrect and perhaps naive to think that Motta knew nothing about these people. He knew exactly what they were, but he also assessed that they would be useful to him.
Anyways, in the due process gang chat on March 17th, 2024, Sadlowski wrote, quote, "When this is all over and Rick is a free man," end quote, she would head to Canada to punch a specific case follower in the mouth. Parsons offered to drive and then followed up with requesting, quote, "one good cunt punch," end quote. Now, if you've listened to our episode, The Unacceptable, you know that such rhetoric is not out of the ordinary for Sadlowski or Parsons. That being said, it is typically not the way people talk in professional legal circles. And I think most professionals, whatever their field, would probably pause if they were suddenly involved in a conversation about a work matter with people talking like this. But at no time did we see the attorneys in the case encourage the others to calm down in the wake of such comments.
We would be remiss in not mentioning the many personal attacks on us that appear in these messages. We do not wish to hide the ball. Frankly, at this point, we don't care even a whit about being criticized by people we do not respect. Had these chats all been complaints and insults about us, we'd have declined to cover it. It's not newsworthy. However, given that we are covering it, we will get into this a bit. We feel it demonstrates something about how the defense team prefers shooting the messenger to accepting critical but sincere feedback.
Naturally, these chats include numerous slams on our physical appearances. Parsons calls us the two potatoes. A tweet envisioning that we have head lice earns an enthusiastic ouch from Ausbrook. And Motta on March 15th, 2024 writes, quote, "Their faux moral superiority makes me want to projectile vomit into Kevin's fucking thinning mop of hair," end quote.
On May 16th, 2024, Motta wrote, quote, "Kevin Green fuck is an attorney in name only. Dude knows fuck all about the law," end quote.
We think that when people have to resort to ad hominem attacks, that is a sign that they have very little of substance to say. As Parsons wrote on April 1st, 2024 at 10:34 p.m., quote, "When you can't attack the brains and the logic, you attack the human," end quote. That's amazing and almost insightful.
Naturally, there was also a lot of conspiratorial thinking demonstrated in these messages. They falsely claim that Anya and I are secret law enforcement plants. Sadlowski repeats to the main group and to her private chat with an Indiana real estate professional that Anya has a particularly daunting pedigree.
She wrote, quote, "Anya's parents could purchase a battleship if they felt like it," end quote. I mean, maybe the classic naval combat game battleship, but frankly, we're more of a Settlers of Catan kind of family.
To the main group, Sadlowski wrote that Anya and I are, quote, "more dangerous than people give them credit for. Their frumpy, weird vibe is by design, so people dismiss them as harmless. Anya's family is one of the most powerful in New York," end quote.
Actually, our frumpy, weird vibe is something we've desperately tried to change throughout our lives without success and have just accepted sadly at this point. And I'm sure my family will be pretty excited to know that we've reached such stature.
In addition to all that, while talking about having a journalist investigate Anya and myself, Sadlowski shared the theory with Miller and Parsons that, quote, "someone we know has suggested that they have a powerful, wealthy funder who also funds Brad and Alice from the prosecutors," end quote.
Now, that is not true. But if it turns out that a shadowy billionaire is listening and you're looking for a podcast to back, you can reach us at murdersheet@gmail.com.
But in all seriousness, there is something almost touchingly naive about building up one's enemies into sort of an unbeatable two-headed monster that controls law enforcement, the media, prosecutors' offices, and the legal and court systems of Indiana. Of course, these folks also believe that Anya and I are somehow simultaneously bumbling stooges with all the shabbiness of Inspector Columbo and none of the brains. As we discussed in past episodes, Sadlowski likes to drag Anya's family into things. So none of this is really surprising. We simply find it disturbing that professionals like Motta, Ausbrook, and Wieneke were sitting around watching an obviously disturbed woman spin out insane theories about Anya's family without, giving any indication whatsoever they were the least bit skeptical.
I think you've lost the plot when you're this focused on some random reporters you happen to not like. We shouldn't take up this much space in these people's lives. I wouldn't even say we live rent-free in their heads, or that we're the landlords. I'd say that we've somehow unwittingly engineered a Soviet-style collectivization of their minds, the scope of which has not been seen since the days of Joseph Stalin.
As for the attorneys, it is helpful to nod along with such unhinged attacks. Anya and I threaten their goals because we are neutral voices they cannot control or intimidate. We value our integrity in our audience more than we value access from anyone. That is apparently very dangerous for them. It shouldn't be. Not if they had a strong case. It shouldn't matter. But they behave as if it matters very much.
Ausbrook called us, quote, effing dangerous, end quote, on April 5th, 2024. Now that is true. We are dangerous because we are neutral voices. We can say we've criticized everyone in the Delphi case. At different times, we've taken stances counter to the victims' families, law enforcement, the defense attorneys, the judge, and the prosecutor's office. We tell you what we think based on our opinions and our understanding of the law and the facts of the case. That is very fucking dangerous for people who behave as if their case will spontaneously combust and burn to ashes if anyone casts anything less than an adoring glance its way. So the only way to deal with that is to attack, attack, attack. These folks seem to not care about the truth. In fact, at this rate, if the truth took human form and walked into the room with them, they'd probably call her an ugly bitch.
In these group chats, we would characterize Motta in particular as riling up the internet cranks about us. As an attorney and a YouTuber with a platform, he confirmed legitimacy on the cranks by agreeing with them and associating with them. Again, this is despite the fact we told him repeatedly that Sadlowski had made comments that we should be shot and that other members of her group have engaged in all manner of stalking and harassing behavior. In this next quote we will read from Motta, when he refers to them, he is talking about Anya and myself. Quote, and again, this is Bob Motta, quote, "I'd love nothing more than to out them. They are two of the biggest clout grabbers I've ever laid eyes," end quote. Then another minute later, quote, "They are as duplicitous as you can get," end quote. They then proceed to speculate that Anya and I were in some way responsible for the leak of crime scene pictures and the resulting suicide of R. In response to Sadlowski calling us evil and depraved with nothing to lose, Motta replies at 1:16 a.m. that Anya and I do in fact have something to lose. Quote, "Their business that they are working so hard to build," end quote.
Sadlowski came back with, quote, "Well, yes, true, but in terms of moral parameters, they aren't encumbered like the rest of us with, truth, decency, conscience," end quote.
At 1:21 a.m., Motta replied, quote, "Yeah, those who have no moral compass and lack the capacity to feel remorse or guilt for their actions are in fact dangerous people," end quote.
On December 19th, 2023, in the chat with Miller and Sadlowski about a, quote, "boring as shit," end quote, episode of ours, Motta wrote, quote, "I blame them more than anyone for the shit that is happening right now. You should sick Joe Lewis on them," end quote. So Joe Lewis is an Australian YouTuber who has called for the park in Delphi dedicated to the memories of Abby and Libby to be bombed. He frequently engages in disturbing and violent rhetoric that pushes the bounds of even the worst actors on YouTube. We think Motta's statement is revealing here. Instead of being rightfully shunned, such a YouTuber is actually considered a valuable tool by this group because he can serve to attack one's enemies.
When you're dealing with pure evil, after all, any response is justified. We will say this. On a strictly personal level, we've been disappointed by Motta for some time. We've not hidden that. In fact, we have criticized his actions publicly on our program. We've also extended grace at times when we felt he may have made an honest mistake, like when he falsely claimed that a court hearing included evidence of Odinus kidnapping other girls in Indiana. All that being said, not once have we ever sought out anyone who has stalked him, who has called for his death, or anything like that, and then egged those people on. Because those are not things that are okay, no matter who the target is. Regardless of your feelings about a professional colleague or rival, there are certain lines that you simply do not cross. And Motta has crossed them.
As we mentioned, we criticized Motta in our episode covering the fundraiser. On May 7th, 2024, in the main group, Parsons asked if Kevin and I had, quote, some sort of heads up that this hearing wasn't really going to be worth it to attend, end quote. Now, we missed the May 7th, 2024 hearing because of a scheduling conflict we couldn't change. But we would remind Parsons and everyone else that, frankly, about half of the hearings in this case aren't very substantive.
Calling us turds, Motta wrote, quote, I like to think it's because they were terrified to be in my presence after their shitty little attempt at a hit piece on me, end quote. He added, quote, maybe Kevin's long-awaited haircut was scheduled for today, end quote.
Parsons responded with, quote, maybe they've been trapped under their bookshelf for the past 4 days while the dogs eat away at their feet, end quote.
Motta replied, quote, that's exactly what was coming next, end quote.
It's interesting that Motta characterized our episode as a shitty little attempt at a hit piece. Remember, in that episode, we accurately reported that he had hijacked hashtags created by the victims' families in order to fundraise for the man accused of killing them. We also offered our view that this was shameful behavior that was unnecessary in order to advocate for Richard Alllen. And some people seem to agree with us, including apparently Bob Motta, who in a May 7th, 2024 tweet publicly apologized, saying that he would no longer use the hashtag. Here's a quote from that long tweet.
Quote, our deepest apologies to the families if our actions inadvertently caused distress. It was never our intention. Our hearts and efforts remain dedicated to ensuring justice is served with integrity and respect for all affected. Hashtag Delphi, end quote.
Of course, his statements to the due process gang make that apology seem rather insincere at worst or suspect at best. If us pointing out that his actions harmed a victim's family was just a shitty little attempt at a hit piece, in his mind, then he ought to have stood on principle. Or was he truly sorry, but behind the scenes simply boasting to save face in front of his friends in the due process gang? It's really perplexing.
We do wonder about Motta. Will he attend the next few hearings now that all of this is out about his very real actions and statements behind the scenes? And by that we mean his statements about the judge, about Libby's family, etc. All of this is a far cry from his public persona, the guy that urges everyone to be kind. If we had to predict it, we would say we imagine he will probably keep going. The validation provided by these internet cranks may prove to be too tempting to pass up on.
On March 19th, 2024, at 7:32 p.m., Sadlowski sent a screenshot of Bob Motta's Defense Diaries account following her account on Twitter. Adds to the spank bank, she wrote.
A spank bank, for those of you who are unaware, is a term to describe memories and images stored away in one's mind for the purposes of being recalled for later masturbatory purposes. Sadlowski seems to be joking that she is so excited about getting this follow from Motta that it was worth placing in her own personal spank bank. The good feelings were definitely a two-way street, though.
On November 8th, 2023, at 10:35 a.m., in the chat with Miller and Sadlowski, Motta responded to Sadlowski's defensive message that she was not a lunatic, despite the rumors, with the following.
Quote, I certainly didn't think you were a loon, Angela. I can detect intelligent people and justice warriors immediately and recognize both of those things about you immediately, end quote. This was followed, we note, by a blushing, smiling emoji.
On April 29th, 2024, at 8:39 a.m., Sadlowski sent Motta a private message asking if she could call him in 10 or 15 minutes.
Motta wrote back, quote, yeah, let me jump in the shower real quick. We are streaming Reed trial, so I gots to get ready, end quote.
Much ink has been spilled about parasocial relationships between creators and their audiences. But we think the implications are fascinating within true crime, about the strange bonds that can form between creators like Motta and the sort of superfans like Sadlowski they're willing to cultivate and exploit. And the accolades and praise didn't just shower down on Motta either. On November 9th, 2023, in response to a message from Motta about how Hennessy was, quote, pissed AF, Sadlowski wrote, quote, that's what we're hearing too, and that's just how I like him. Hennessy about to be my sugar daddy if he isn't careful. Keep it up, Mr. Fancy Suit, end quote.
Motta concurred, quote, he's a bad motherfucker, end quote. In our earlier episode, we called Motta a shill for the defense. Oxford defines a shill as a, quote, accomplice of a hawker, gambler, or swindler who acts as an enthusiastic customer to entice or encourage others, end quote. Essentially, in modern parlance, it's a person who boosts another individual or a group without disclosing his connection to that group.
An example I've used before centers around Walmart, a company I used to cover as a journalist. Now, if I'm a journalist reporting on Walmart, and I go on television and say, hey, their self-checkout capabilities are pretty good and here's why, that's fine. I'm independent. That's perhaps just my opinion, born out of expertise, experience, perhaps looking at competitors' self-checkout lines. Now, that changes if I am somehow secretly getting scoops and access from Walmart based on the understanding that I am part of their team and will therefore toe the company line. And I go on TV and say, hey, their self-checkout capabilities are pretty good and here's why, and I don't disclose that, then I am a shill. Then I am essentially an unofficial spokesperson who's not telling the audience and being honest about my true connections to Walmart. That is a problem. That is unethical.
Motta did not like that we called him a shill for the defense in this case. But let's see how he described his role in the case in his own words to his internet crank friends and to Allen's own defense team members. This is Motta, quote, I'm in a unique position because the former defense team trusts me and I can unequivocally state that they absolutely believe that Rick is actually innocent, as does Kathy, end quote.
On November 8th, 2023, he went even further.
And again, this is Bob Motta, quote, I'm trying to inform and sway the country one person at a time that this is a railroad job of epic proportions. I've got the street cred and the professional experience to be the public voice for Rick and Brad and Andy. I give zero fucks about clout, as I know none of this crew does. And as I tell Nicole, I rely on y'all popping off when needed, as I stand behind y'all as the measured voice of reason. It's a perfect balance, and balance is what is needed in a situation wherein a man's life is at stake, end quote.
So Motta prefers to describe himself as the voice for Richard Alllen, Brad Rozzi, and Andrew Baldwin. That's definitely a nicer way of putting it than shill, but he has given away the game here. He will leverage his links to the defense team and his own professional credibility to be the, quote, public voice for Rick and Brad and Andy, end quote, and put out their talking points on demand. He may give, quote, zero fucks about clout, end quote, but that level of access would certainly be a boon for any creator. And in order to maintain his own facade of professionalism and credibility, of course, the real dirty work would be left to the web underlings who worship him. Certainly sounds like shilling to us.
In our next episode, we'll delve more into Cara Wieneke's role in all this, offer many more bizarre claims from the cranks, and we will discuss a proposal offered by the group that sounds a little bit like jury tampering, at least to us. Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.
Don't wait. Skip the lines with a free day of Fastlane when you purchase a King's Dominion 2025 Gold Pass by August 4th. Make the park your own with unlimited visits through the rest of this year and all 2025. That's 2 years of Halloween haunts and Winterfest, plus the chance to ride Rapterra, the all-new launched wing coaster in 2025. All for just $95 plus applicable taxes and fees. Online only. Don't miss our best offer of the season. Get your 2025 Gold Pass today at kingsdominion.com.